welcome to the Monday, November 16th iteration of Charlotte City Council's Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting. I'll start by allowing us to go around the table. I am one of your co-chairs, Braxton Winston.
Tarek Picard, co-chair.
Larkin Eggleston, committee member.
James Mitchell, committee member.
Matt Newton, committee member.
Dana Fenton, the city's Intergovernmental Relations Manager.
Tracy Dodson, City Manager's Office.
And then our guest, well, I guess we can wait. We'll get to them. If there's a bunch of folks, I think we can get to them as they're about to present. But again, for those that are at home watching and that follow along to these riveting committee meetings, know that we are on a bit of a work pathway that started really this summer. Today, the agenda is really going to push us along as we kind of debrief the results of the election that we had 2 weeks ago. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fenton, who can give us another overview of the agenda and then get us on our way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item on the agenda today is a federal post-election briefing from our lobbyist at Holland & Knight, and I think we have on the phone or on the WebEx, we have Rich Gold, Shauna Watley, and Lisa Hawk. So, Rich and crew, would you like to go ahead and take it from here, please?
You bet. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. This is Rich Gold. I'm going to go ahead and get started and appreciate giving us the opportunity to talk to y'all today. We want to go over sort of what happened a week ago, 2 weeks ago, tomorrow, in the election and what continues to happen out there, both in terms of the federal level with the presidency and the Senate most particularly, but also the House, and then where things went in the states with state legislatures and the governor's offices. And then we'll go into a little bit more specifically about what that means for us and where we're going forward in the lame duck session and early next year with regard to policy broadly, and then obviously the city's priorities most specifically. So first things first, you've got the electoral map as it sits, and the light blue and pink states of North Carolina and Georgia have now been called, which puts us at 306 for President-elect Biden at the end of the day in electoral votes. And I believe the president is at 232 in terms of total electoral votes. We're going to talk in a minute about what drove election night and why we are where we are. But you can see the map, and up top in the upper Midwest and the Midwest, the reconstruction that President-elect Biden was successful at in putting together the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and then obviously adding on Arizona and probably most surprisingly Georgia as well. Next slide, please. So when we look at the House, we really start sort of seeing the trends of election night from a demographic perspective, and I want to mention it because it underlies policy going forward in terms of what the president-elect and the new Congress will be focused on. So for sort of the main trends from election night that I want you to note here, the president-elect, while being very, very successful in rural and suburban areas, lost to the president significantly in rural areas. So President Trump managed to get a 6% increase over 2016, where he had already really juiced up the rural vote. He managed to get a 6% increase over his 2016 rural participation numbers. And that's obviously a huge difference and a huge outcome. And you see that here in the House map as about a dozen Democrats who served in ex-urban and rural districts lost. And sort of the ultimate example of that is Colin Peterson, who's been a member from rural Minnesota for 30 years, 35 years, one of the most senior members in the House, finally lost an election in rural Minnesota in farm country. And you're going to see that really around the country, and that's why those red states are so red. And you really see Democrats concentrating their votes in the cities and the suburbs. The second point from election night that I would just raise is, and you see this again, for instance, if you look at the Rio Grande Valley area in Texas, as well as the Southeast Florida congressional seats, President Trump did very, very well amongst certain nationalities of Hispanics, particularly with men. He did much better than he had done 4 years ago. So for Venezuelan, Cuban, and in the border area, even Mexican men, the president managed to really kind of reverse bad numbers in 2016 and really managed to get those men who tend to traditionally have an anti-socialist viewpoint and were somewhat scared, I think, by some of the Democratic rhetoric of, Green New Deal and everything else. He really managed to get the vote out there. And the best two seats to look at in that space are the two Southeast Florida seats in Miami-Dade County that Republicans won back after having lost them only a few years ago. And former Congresswoman Donna Shalala, who had been the Clinton administration Health and Human Services Secretary, lost her seat in what wasn't even all that close a race. So those were the two Trump real changes. The big advantage and really game set match for Biden on election night, and you'll see this in the blueness of the blue suburbs in areas like Philadelphia and Detroit, and obviously around Charlotte as well, were suburbs really going for Biden in a big way. So as opposed to Hillary Clinton in 2016, the president-elect managed to increase the share of Democratic vote in the suburbs by about 13%. And that really was the story of the evening at the presidential level, and is the reason why, despite the surge in a rural area, you see the numbers you see here with regard to House seats, and the Democrats will still hold the majority. The Senate, the story I just told on the three forces from election night explained to you why, for instance, Democrats were able to win in purple states like Colorado and beat Cory Gardner, and were able to win in Arizona, but were not successful at defeating Senator Tillis and Senator Collins in North Carolina and Maine, with the rural turnout in both states really just swamping Democrats who had been up in the polls only a few days before. So we expect, depending on the outcome of the Georgia runoffs, which will be held January 5th, and obviously there are two of them, to either be at 52-48, 51-49, or 50-50. Tradition in Georgia, the Republican Party has won pretty much all of these runoffs since the early 80s. So the Democrats have a high hill ahead of them to pick up seats here. But obviously there'll be a lot of time and effort and money spent on those races, so we'll see. But you can probably bet that Republicans hold the bare Senate majority after January 5th. We'll go on to the next slide. And actually, Dan, I think we're going one more slide further so I can finish up governors and state legislatures. So in gubernatorial races, not any major change here. This is the other area where you're definitely seeing, particularly in rural areas of states, governors were bucked up on the Republican side. But at the same time, governors have been doing pretty well and trending pretty well in their polling data based on their performance on COVID. and have pretty high popularity rates, and that's why you're seeing most of the incumbent governors holding on, obviously including your governor in North Carolina. And then the next slide, Dana. So state legislatures, obviously, as you all know, we just completed the census and the sentence the end of October. And I think Democrats had high hopes for being able to take 3 or 4 state legislatures and being able to have greater control over the apportionment of congressional seats for the coming decade. That did not happen. Not only did they not win those state legislatures, but they lost a couple, including states like New Hampshire, where those high hopes were not only dashed, but soundly reversed. So we are in a space going forward where Republicans are in a pretty good position for redistricting moving forward in the next year. And then I think we go back, Dana, to the Charlotte delegation slide, and I hand over at this point, I think, to Lisa.
Okay, great. Thanks. Great to be with all of you today. No major changes, right, with data. It's just, I think it's like 2 before in terms of the delegation. Obviously, the big news is, as you're all well aware, the re-election of Senator Thom Tillis, obviously a very hard-fought race with tons of outside money poured in. Dan Bishop, Senator Burr has 2 more years. I would be surprised if he ran again. And Alma Adams, and of course, Richard Hudson, that district, he's been in like 3 different districts in 6 years, something like that. But he does consider himself to be Charlottean and is helpful whenever he can with regard to the city of Charlotte. A couple of things just to note with regard to the delegation. Dan Bishop being on Homeland Security, particularly the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Transportation, can be helpful and is something that we may want to consider leveraging to the greatest extent possible, given Charlotte moves and some of the innovation that we're talking about. I think it's certainly possible, if not probable, that Senator Burr will take the chairmanship of the Senate Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, since he is not currently serving as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. This assumes that either one or both of the Georgia Republican seats hold. So, we've got a lot of consistency with regard to the delegation. Dana, next, please. Yeah, just skip over. And I'm going to talk about the lame duck. I think key when we look at the lame duck session is that we're still not exactly sure what's going to happen on some major pieces of legislation. Current Senate Majority Leader expressed a desire to do something year end, but obviously the together on a stimulus piece into the election, and whether they're going to get there right now, we don't really know. But there's a lot that's up for grabs. One is, stimulus and trying to help folks who are really suffering from the pandemic. Sean is going to talk a little bit more about the COVID relief legislation as we might be seeing it. But they also need to finish out the year-end appropriation. So there's a very strong desire on the part of the Senate and the House to try and finish up the appropriations bill for federal fiscal year 21. And they're in the process of negotiating that. It could all fall apart. But I think that's important just to be aware that at least they're trying to get something done. So we could end up with something like an omnibus legislation in the middle of December when everything expires on December 12th. Or we could have an utter and complete breakdown of everything and all the legislation sitting there in front of us and picking it over into the next Congress. If I were a betting person, I would bet to figure something out, even if it's on a smaller, skinnier nature, and then address some of the major issues going into the next Congress. I think the most important thing just to keep in mind is even if we're at a 50-50 Senate split, the history supports the way that it was done previously is that they would divide the committees on a 50-50 basis, and that if a committee did not pass something out because it was tied, then legislation could go to the floor. Now, this is a much different environment from years past, but that's the way they've governed in that scenario. So no matter what happens, I expect to see a good amount of bipartisanship out of necessity. And certainly the vice president-elect, well, the former vice president, now president-elect, has expressed a desire for bipartisanship. We may be seeing more and more of that. So with that, I will turn it over to Shauna to talk more about COVID-19 legislation.
Thanks, Lisa. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. And so as Lisa stated, as we move into the 2021 legislative priorities and important dates, COVID-19 will basically be running the show. The Biden administration, or President-elect Biden, have to get used to saying that, I'm dropping the VP, is very much focused on this. The Congress has stated this is a priority. Speaker Pelosi and McConnell, Majority Leader McConnell, are supposed to be going into negotiations soon to see if they can get something done during the lame duck. There's a huge gap that they need to overcome, a huge bridge. Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats are looking at $2.4 trillion, and Speaker McConnell, Majority Leader McConnell, is looking more in the $500 billion range. However, the president did tweet over the weekend that he would like for it to be a large COVID relief package. So as Lisa said, we'll just have to wait and see. But if it's not handled in the lame duck, it will have to be addressed during the new 117th Congress, as well as working with the Biden administration. So we'll have to see. Some of the big issues, as you all have probably heard over the last few months, Speaker Pelosi is very much committed on making sure state and local governments get the funds that they need. It's critical, as well as they would like some type of stimulus relief in stimulating the economy, small business relief, and unemployment insurance expansion. And also, they would like to figure out how to shore up health care for frontline workers. So we'll continue to watch that and keep you all updated, but that's pretty much where we are on the COVID relief package. The other thing I would like to note, we worked really hard to make sure that there was transit funding in the House bill as it relates to COVID relief, so hopefully that will stay, as well as airport funding. It was not included in the Senate, in the House package for airport funding, but we worked really hard to make sure that it was included in the Senate package. And so we will be monitoring that very closely, because we know those are issues that are important to the city. As we move into a Biden administration and important priorities, infrastructure is important for President-elect Biden. He has stated he would like to see something considered as early as February if that were to take place. We know that the surface transportation bill, which is important to us, will be the backbone of that legislation, and then they will be considering other issues like affordable housing, water, as well as broadband. And so as they continue to have those discussions, we don't know for sure if it will come up that early, but we'll certainly be watching. And that is definitely a priority for the Biden team. Also, clean energy bill, they're looking at corporate tax increases, a minimum wage increase. We will look to see during the first 100 days rollback of some of the Trump executive orders. He'll be definitely addressing the immigration issue. He will be rolling back some of those policies that he did not like. And then we will also be taking a look at police reform and social justice issues. So if you all have any questions, you'll see here there's some important dates. Congress will reconvene for the 117th in January, early January 2021. April 15th, 2021, Congress is supposed to adopt a budget resolution by April 15th. So that will be important, and we'll be continuing to follow that and keep you all posted. And then also September 30th, 2021 is the last day of the fiscal year. And hopefully all the appropriations bills will be done. But as you all know, that normally does not happen. So those are kind of some of the important dates moving forward. And we're open for questions.
Thank you very much, team. It's good to see you virtually. Good to see you as always. I don't see any hands raised on my side, but does anybody from the committee have any questions?
Mr. Chair, Co-Chair, may I?
Yes, sir.
So thank you, staff. Just a kind of one question for everyone, actually. So Rich, on your slide, you showed 3 races uncalled, 2 in Georgia. Where's the 3rd Senate race? I didn't see it on the slide. You had 3 uncalled, and 2, I know Georgia's doing a special election. Where's the 3rd Senate race?
Yeah, I think the third has now been called. Alaska was called late Friday, and I'm not sure we got this change in time. So Republicans held in Alaska, so it's just the 2 Georgians.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. Hey, Shauna, on the dates again, April 15, 2021, and then you had a September 30 in the fiscal year. What was the first date in January? When were they?
So the Congress will reconvene on January, I believe the date is January 3rd, for the 117th.
Okay, so then if we stay on schedule, and hopefully we still have our NLC congressional meeting in March, they give us time to really to continue to lobby our priorities really before they're making an adoption April 15th, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. That's all I had.
Mr. Co-Chair,
You got it, Co-Chair.
just one quick follow-up for Rich. So that means it's 50-48 in the Senate, barring the 2 seats in Georgia, right?
Correct.
So then I think just tactically getting to probably one of the things that's more relevant to this body in our intergovernmental work is our federal legislative agenda. And I think it's pretty well baked, but I think the thing on our mind is obviously, what has potential for legs with our delegation, but also, not to die a fiery death in the Senate. But would you, in the off scenario, low probabilistic scenario that it goes 50-50, right? Is that something that we should be thinking about right now? Or is it so small? Or if it does happen, is the tiebreaker how do we think about that, I guess, as I try to meet find where the rubber meets the road for us?
Sure. So, I think, the first 6 months of next year are going to be in Congress, largely about the virus, economic stimulus, and healthcare. I think the president-elect takes a different view of national coordination around COVID and coordinating with the state and local level. And I think that will result in a national plan that probably has legislative impacts, that will be worked through the House and the Senate. And I do think that has the ability to be bipartisan. The second piece is, economic stimulus. And there, as Shauna spoke about, the likelihood of an infrastructure package, the likelihood of, seeing money pumping through the system akin to what was done in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to stimulate jobs and, in particular, help in the sectors like leisure and travel, restaurants, et cetera, that are, really struggling with the continuing paucity of ability to kind of go out in public and live life. So I think economic stimulus will be a second piece. The third piece is a little more subject to events. So as you are probably aware, the Supreme Court heard its case last week over the Affordable Care Act and the individual mandate. The court needs to decide whether the individual mandate is unconstitutional, and if they strike it, do they just strike the mandate or do they strike the whole law? Obviously, coming out of the debate, it sounded like a majority of the court was of the view that if the mandate needed to go, that it was severable and that the law would survive. But suffice to say that the Affordable Care Act has really been implemented in a way to help take it apart over the last 4 years. And so we are expecting there may need to be some changes in how it's being administered by the executive branch, as well as potential legislative changes that could come up in the agenda depending on what the court does next year in April or May when we get a decision. So, you know, there are definitely going to be other items moving. We're certainly going to get a transportation bill. The difference between 5248 and 5050 in the Senate is somewhat marginal, to be honest. It would certainly make the president-elect's nominees move more quickly if Senator Schumer were the majority leader. So that would help staff the government more quickly. But remember, to get much of anything done in the Senate, you need 60 votes to invoke cloture anyway. So having 50 enables you to decide what gets put on the Senate floor and force debate on things. But, you know, a united Republican majority or minority would still be in the position of blocking final passage of things. So I don't want to poo-poo having the majority. Obviously, you know, Democrats will tell you they would rather have the majority than not. But it doesn't necessarily change what you can get across the finish line at the end of the day. So it's not like it's realistic at this juncture for you know, legislation to create a public option under healthcare or Medicare 55 or the Green New Deal or any of the more progressive concepts that were you know, basically bantied about during the campaign. To do that, we really would have needed, you know, a 55, 56, 57 or higher seat majority. And obviously we're not going to be close to that this time.
The one other thing I just would add is that regardless, we've got 2 Republican senators who care very much about Charlotte and our transportation needs. And so we're working with them regardless, as they're going to be our chief advocates as our senators. So I just wanted to call that out. And the mayor had the opportunity to speak with both of them about some Charlotte priorities before the election. And I think that there's a strong interest on both the senator's part in continuing to work with Charlotte around our transportation and all of our objectives.
Great. Thank you all. Yes, Mr. Mitchell, sorry. Go ahead, Brax.
No, if we have any other questions.
Councilman Mitchell has one, I see.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Coach. Just one more. So Lisa, to that point, I think we showed that Dan Bishop is on the House of Small Business Committee. And, you know, some of us are very passionate about small business. So is it safe to say we should have some dialogue between now and January the 3rd? Or you feel confident that he will be reappointed to the Small Business Subcommittee?
I'm not certain, but I think it's likely that he'll be reappointed. And I think that, you know, the city should continue to prepare and finalize its agenda for what it needs. But I think that there's a real opportunity to be working with him, and the mayor had an opportunity to speak with him about all of the city's priorities before the election. And I think that there's an open door for him to be working with us, and his position on both the small business as well as the Homeland Security committees. I think for someone who's a freshman, well, now he'll be going into technically his 2nd term, but I think is helpful to us. And we should definitely be leveraging them where we can, as well as all of our representatives.
Thank you, co-chairs.
Well, thank you, Rich, Shawna, and Lisa. As always, committee, we have a lot of work to do between now and January when we get to our retreat after the Charlotte moves. Task force report is done, so the work continues, and we look forward to it. Dana, unless you have anything else, or esteemed guests, I think we can go to the next section.
I have nothing else, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you.
Mr. Chairman, the next item on our agenda is a presentation on the state election, post-election briefing. And our team from Kilpatrick Townsend will be presenting. Our team consists of Ches McDowell, Nelson Freeman, Amanda Donovan, Hampton Billups, and John Easterling. And today I understand that Nelson Freeman will be giving the presentation. So Nelson, please proceed.
Thank you for that, Dana, and pleasure to be here with everyone on the IRC. I would say if we could go to the first slide, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is just how split so much of our Council of State races ended up being and how that kind of played out and how I think that really bucked the trend of what everyone anticipated at the statewide level. And then, you know, we'll kind of flex into the state House and Senate seats. And, you know, numerically, we're looking almost identical as what we were last year, which I believe came as a little bit of a surprise to some folks, not a surprise to other folks, but there was some evident trends that emerged during this election that probably influenced races that individuals in the state political prognosticators didn't think were going to be as in play as they ended up being. And so what we're seeing right now is actually Chess's sample ballot for where he was, and this isn't necessarily how Chess voted. This is how the election kind of turned out. And just, I think this always points out, there was a conscientious decision by the electorate, somewhat on personality in certain of these races, but I think that there was more substantive consideration of policies that these different seats held. You know, I can't pretend to tell you that you know, you can look through the looking glass and know exactly why each voter voted a certain way. But I think that there was obviously a decision point where someone chose to vote for a Donald Trump for as far as North Carolina goes, but also chose to vote for Roy Cooper. And that population, that opted to bounce around existed. If we could go to the next slide, please. So anyway, the governor's race, everyone really thought that this was going to be a little bit closer than it ended up being, mainly just because the president had spent so much time in North Carolina, that Dan Forest had spent so much time with the president in North Carolina, and the president won the state. And so I think that there is some folks that really thought that this was really going to be closer to that 50.5 points, not the full 1.5 pull away that it ended up being. And particularly in surprise that the McCrory race had been so close, just given all the controversy of his last 18 months in office, that certainly did not bear itself out. That's a pretty wide margin, almost 300,000 votes separating. If we could go to the next.
Nelson, let me add to that. This is Chess. If we get back real quick, I just want to mention that you know, Pat McCrory only lost by 10,000.
We're having a little trouble with your connection.
Chess, we got a connection issue there, bud.
Yeah.
Ches, you may need to log out and log back in, because
administration really had a couple things you could point to that were the reason for him losing. Proceed anyway, Nelson.
We'll pretend like what you said was highly intelligent, Chess.
I think what Chess was trying to get to is that there were so many events that led up into the 2016 election for Governor McCrory, some positive, some negative, but there were major swings against him in areas like northern Mecklenburg County, in the Wilmington area, in the Raleigh area, that swung a lot of votes away from him and towards Roy Cooper, and that resulted in that 10,000 vote loss. This time around, certainly as Jess I think was alluding to, the bully pulpit of the governor being on stage for the last 6 months, and there being such a generally high approval rating for how he has handled the pandemic, that certainly caused his numbers to swell as part of that race. And then moving into the Council of State races, these were the 3 open seats. Lieutenant Governor, which has obviously been Dan Forest previously. Cherie Berry had stepped down from her position as Commissioner of Labor, and Superintendent of Public Instruction Mark Johnson opted to run for a different seat this last election. And I think, personally, I think that most folks were a little bit of surprise with Lieutenant Governor's race turning into the numbers that it ultimately was, and with public instruction. I think that with the focus of the pandemic being so, parents and families have been laser focused on their children's education this year. And it really was, I think, a real interesting step that the Republican opted to retain that seat. I think that the nature of people's interest in both public education, but charters, virtual learning, I think the policies that they went out and campaigned on were more likely to carry the day than just naturally their party affiliation. Next slide, please. So the other Council of State races, as you can see, these ended up splitting all across the parties, but these are the same seats that won in 2016. We'll go to the next slide if we can, Dana. And I think this is where what we really wanted to focus on. You do see here the amount of separation from the top vote getter, which is Steve Troxler, Commissioner of Agriculture, who did not have, the marquee event of this year, which is the state fair, all the way down to Senator Tom Tillis, who, a little bit more than 200,000 votes separated those two races, which is generally surprising given the ballot location and kind of the dynamics of where you are from top ballot to down ballot. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm drop off as the race went on. Catherine Truitt, who's kind of your second row far left, through Josh Dobson, who is dead center with Elaine Marshall and Beth Woods in the middle there. Almost all got exactly the same vote counts. They were virtually identical. So as folks and citizens decided to make those decisions, they were going on both policy and considerations of what those offices needed to do and needed to achieve. So I think it was in my opinion, a very interesting decision structure that folks went to get to that caused them to jump around so much. Obviously, if you look at Governor Cooper being the second biggest vote getter and then Dale Folwell being the third largest, I think that does speak to a lot of the work that he has done to represent state employees. I think that his work on the healthcare side and working on insurance for the state employees has been a real win for him within that voting segment in the state, and I think we'll continue to see that over the coming 4 years of his term. Next slide, Dana. And so I think one of the things that we always say is that this seems a little bit awkward that North Carolina is so split across the board, but what Chest and I have pointed out here is that only in 2008 did North Carolina vote for a unified ballot. So Barack Obama, Bev Perdue, and Kay Hagan. Every other year, the citizenry opts to kind of pick and choose the legislative leadership that they are looking to have. Next slide, Daniel. So in getting into the, I think, more nitty-gritty of state-based politics, there were commentaries that I was getting, text messages like everybody else was on election night, people who honestly thought that House was going to flip. Everyone thought that the Senate was going to be right on or just at a 25-25 margin out of 50, and that did not, of course, happen. I think what kind of the political folks had not considered is all politics are local, and the campaign message really was a big topic. The speaker in particular went around, visited every single district, really was very focused on flippable seats, as they all are, but there were certain hold seats that they weren't sure about, and really spoke to the issues of law and order. That was his largest campaign talking point throughout this. And the result was that there were a pickup of 4 seats. And I think that bucked the trend that everybody was anticipating for the state, which was interesting. That certainly does not get the House to a supermajority. And so there'll still be quite a bit of political wrangling that goes on there. And similar with the Senate, there was a lot of prognostication that we would be at a 25-25 split. And that is why there was so much focus on the lieutenant governor's race. People were very focused on that race as being part of the larger Senate landscape. Ultimately, two Senate seats in the last redraw that we had in 2019 were known to be, 2019, they were known to be very likely Democrat seats, that those were in Wake and Mecklenburg counties. Those seats ultimately did flip, but the Senate did pick up one new returning Republican seat for Wilmington. And so, I think that overall, at least there is a major municipality with Wilmington that does have a Republican there that will help ensure that the Voice of Cities does get some recognition in the state Senate. Jess, anything that you'd like to add on that?
I don't think so. Like Nelson said, generally there was a big consensus that the legislature was going to flip at least one chamber. And if anything happened, it was stronger for Republicans. The Michael Lee seat was the closest race out of all the Senate races, and it is outside of the recount margin. So that race will be certified, and that one is settled. Michael Lee beat Harper Peterson, who's the former mayor, and Harper Peterson beat Michael Lee in 2018. With a couple of the redistricting changes, the seats that the House and Senate Republicans lost in 2018, they picked up a few of those kind of suburban area seats in the House, but weren't able to pick up those seats in the Senate. I think the biggest issue was for them was the candidates that they had in a lot of the races weren't able to compete with at that point, an incumbent senator or an incumbent House member. So overall, everything's the same that it was last year in the Senate and the House.
Yeah, and the leadership of both chambers is not likely to pivot very much. There have been certain departures, and certain individuals will step into new leadership roles. But as somewhat as DC has become more centralized into the offices of the primary senators and the speaker's office there, as you all know, North Carolina is very much a top-down apparatus, and so being able to have an open and cordial dialogue with those leadership offices certainly keeps the city and the city's priorities kind of front and center. Next slide, Dana.
Next slide, please.
Got it. So I know I talked a little bit earlier about the issue of law and order. I think that a lot of the strong messaging that was deployed through the state house ended up having a residual value over in the judicial races, where we saw on the statewide races being a clean sweep for the Republicans, which I personally believe, and I think a lot of folks did not see this coming. In all frankness, the Chief Justice seat is still up in the air, and I think there's meetings going on as we sit right now that are continuing to work on that race. Those numbers have tightened even more than they are right now. It's closer to I think it was less than 300 votes separating them as of 2 hours ago, and so. I think we'll still learn more about Justice Newby and Justice Beasley's race here. Hopefully we'll have answers before the end of the day, but that doesn't mean that there won't be more question marks in the next couple of days once they get to the bottom of that. And Jess, I know that there were some topics going on in Pembroke today.
Yeah,
Did you have any?
They recently found last night that there was a precinct in Pembroke that was not counted. That county in Robeson County went fairly heavily for President Trump, more strongly than usual for Lieutenant Governor Forrest and Tom Tillis. So that county, that used to be a 75-25 Democrat county, is over the last 8 years shifted more Republican, or really the last 4 years have shifted more Republican. So 2,000 votes that are outstanding there could, when we're talking about a race that's been as close as 60 votes out of 5.2 million votes that have been cast, that will likely change again. They also discovered that in Washington County, which is a Democrat area, that votes were counted twice. And so they're going to go back and correct those vote totals, which will likely take a couple away from Chief Justice Beasley. So this is a very interesting race, and it has a huge implication for the state of our state. Currently, the Supreme Court is 6-1 Democrat majority. 2 of those seats were flipped. And so if Justice Newby ends up winning, it will be a 4-3 Democrat majority, with one member who is very much a center of the road moderate and is likely to side with be a very much Anthony Kennedy swing vote on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Now, the Chief Justice position in particular is important because the Chief Justice appoints the 3 judge panels. So when cases about redistricting, which will be heard, there's no question there'll be lawsuits over redistricting next year, the Chief Justice is the one who appoints those 3 judge panels. So whoever wins this race is going to either appoint Republican judges to the 3 judge panels or Democrat judges to the 3 judge panels, which are going to be reviewing redistricting. So huge implications with a race that has got down to the difference of something like 58 votes out of 5.2 million cast. So certainly fascinating to keep watching what happens in that race.
Next slide, please.
That, Nelson, is the end of the presentation.
Okay, got it.
And it's
So
coming.
I think
There's a
that
little bit of a delay.
On takeaways, there was an unbelievable amount of money spent in these races. The partisan makeup of the legislature has changed. It did not change as much as folks thought it would. And we are going into another redistricting year for the state of North Carolina. And I want to just touch on the redistricting element quickly, because I think it will provide it'll be an umbrella over the entire legislative session as they get to next year. It is likely that census data will not be provided until July at the earliest. And because of that delay, the North Carolina General Assembly very likely will have concluded its regularly scheduled legislative session beforehand. And so some of the political considerations that goes into how the districts get redrawn will be influencing how certain members are approached during this legislative session. It will influence how certain legislators choose to participate in bipartisan legislative fights or opportunities, and just understand that there's a lot of interest to make deals prior to that, so that every single legislator can do what they can for their district before things get altered to the next election. With that, Dana, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Nelson, and I'll hand this back over to the co-chairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. If I don't see any hands raised right now, but if any committee members have questions for our lobbyists, now would be the time. Going once, going twice. Mr. Co-Chair, do you have anything?
Mr. Mitchell?
Oh,
Councilmember Mitchell?
Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. One question, when will the new legislator be sworn in?
So the Council of State will typically swear in on January 1st. The legislators, they don't convene for their session until, I think it's the 13th or the 17th. Amanda, correct me.
January 13th.
15th.
13th.
But the swearing-ins will typically happen in their districts, that kind of the first full week. it's at the discretion of the incoming member. I will say that all previous terms conclude at the last day of December.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Bakari, do you have anything to add to this section?
I do not.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, folks. We will be in touch as we continue on putting together this legislative agenda in December. So thank you for all your help to this point. All right, Dana, I think we're ready to move on to the next section unless you have anything to add.
I have nothing to add. I just want to thank our state and federal lobbyists for providing those presentations. Mr. Chairman, the next item on the agenda today is to continue discussion of the committee referral regarding the Citizens Review Board process and subpoena power. Next slide, please. And as you all will recall, we started talking about this last month. And the policy question there is to develop a legislative strategy to advance granting subpoena power to the Citizens Review Board. This was one of several referrals related to the Safe Charlotte initiative that were made to City Council committees back in August. Next slide, please. And just do some level setting here. The City of Charlotte formed its board back in 1997 and secured local legislation allowing the chief's dispositions on investigations to be shared with the board. And in the last couple sessions, 2017 and 2019, the City Council did request subpoena power. And there was something here that I need to bring up to you all. Just want to point out, this is pretty strong for us, is that there was agreement between the governing body and the chief of police on this issue, on the need for subpoena power. And that still exists today heading into 2021. I think is looking out there at the landscape in some other cities, you don't always find that agreement between that governing body and chief of police on this issue. And then, of course, on late last month, on October 26th, the City Council adopted the Safe Charlotte framework that included supporting working with stakeholders to grant subpoena power for the Citizens Review Board. So you basically have this issue contained in a sort of what I would call a strategic planning document for the city. Next slide, please. On October 19th, staff recommendations are reprinted here. Going to continue monitoring the proceedings of two task forces. The one is the Governor's Task Force on Racial Equity and Criminal Justice, and the second is a House Select Committee on Community Relations, Law Enforcement, and Justice that Speaker Moore has appointed. And then we'll be reaching out to find out to law enforcement employee organizations, to other cities and counties and other groups about how they might agree with the need for subpoena power. And we agreed to continue this discussion today. Next slide, please. And to put together a chart here, sort of like the charts we put together for when we talk about the legislative agenda issues, put all the different groups that we have tried to find out how they feel about this particular issue of subpoena power. And it started off with the two groups, the statewide groups, the Speaker Moore's Committee on Community Relations, Law Enforcement, and Justice, and the Governor's Task Force on Racial Equity. The Speaker Moore's Task Force has not met since before the committee last met on the 19th of October. In fact, they meet this coming Wednesday, November 18th. The Governor's Task Force, though, has talked about this very issue. In particular, Working Group Number 1 has. Now, Working Group Number 1 is recommending to the full task force establishment of a framework for all cities and counties to follow when forming citizen review boards. But they did not take any action on the subpoena power issue, and that was an issue that had been referred to that working group. Going down to two statewide associations, one is the Association of Chiefs of Police, and the second is the Police Executives Association. And both those groups pretty much have the same positions. They do agree, or not necessarily agree, but also they will support local cities if they want to form citizen review boards. But on the issue of subpoena power, there is no position from either group. I think what you would find, though, is that if they were press to take an issue on subpoena power, you would have a lot of discussion, very robust discussion in both of those groups, probably that they would end up being opposed to subpoena power. The next one, I think, next two groups are the law enforcement employee organizations, the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge here in Charlotte, and the Police Benevolent Association. And I think you all know, just like in 2017 and 2019, the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 9 is opposed to subpoena power. And the other group, the Police Benevolent Association, is willing to work with cities on the formation of boards, but they have actually questioned the need for subpoena power. They don't have an outright position, as far as we can tell, on subpoena power, but judging by comments they've made in the press lately, they definitely question whether it's needed or not. In fact, they equate subpoena power in some cases with doing investigations of alleged allegations of police misconduct. And of course, that is something right now that the chief of police and his internal bureau are in charge of. So, Mr. Chairman, let's go to the next slide, please. Local governments in the state, there are several that have review boards. They go by a variety of names. We call ours the Citizens Review Board. They might be called police oversight boards, or some other phraseology. And basically, we have 7 cities: Asheville, Durham, Fayetteville, Greensboro, Raleigh, and Winston-Salem have boards in addition to Charlotte. The city of Wilmington is considering establishing such a review board. And right now, there are some discussions taking place in some of those cities at their governing body level about subpoena power and other issues related to review boards. In fact, in Fayetteville, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of press briefings and not press briefings, but a lot of writing in the media about how their council is looking at maybe trying to get independent investigatory powers, which is something that the city council here has not wanted to go for. So I could tell you right now, just generally out there among local governments, it's a very, very fluid situation. And the next slide, please. So right now, staff recommendation, you might recall too that we talked a little bit about this last week at the action review. And based on recent events, I stated that I did not see police a subpoena power for the Citizens Review Board of having a favorable outcome at all in this coming legislative session. And I think for that reason, we would recommend that this be classified as an aspirational issue. In the meantime, to be productive, we do believe that the city should seek out other local governments interested in forming a coalition with the intent of working with those different groups that were cited on the couple previous slides ago: the Police Chiefs Association, the Police Executive Association, and the law enforcement employee organizations. In addition, it does not state it here, but it would also be in addition to trying to work with the House and Senate leadership on review board issues. I would say on that there was legislation filed 2 years ago that would allow cities to form review boards. It would explicitly have not allowed cities to have these boards exercise subpoena power, but it did put forth a framework for all cities to form these boards, which is a lot more than what is in the law right now. And the desired outcome from this would be to build confidence in the review board process so that issues like subpoena power can receive serious consideration in the long term. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I would throw it back to you for any discussion or Q&A.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Fenton. Before I make any comments, I wanted to open it up to committee members for any input or suggestions or questions. Hearing none, I tend to agree with this staff recommendation. I do believe that we should make our delegation, our incoming delegation, aware that this is still a priority for us. But it seems like there there's an opening here to really kind of potentially lead some work. I think we need to kind of old school go ahead and press the flesh with these 6, potentially 7 other cities that have been mentioned here in Asheville, Raleigh, Greensboro, Durham, Winston-Salem, and potentially Fayetteville. You know, we have been doing this for quite some time, and we know the pitfalls. We know, as Mr. Fenton said, we have now 2 police chiefs who see the importance of this, but also see the nuances of this. So, you know, I think it would behoove us to at least attempt to share some of the experiences that we have with other municipalities, but also with the potential of forming something that they can get behind and potentially get their area delegations around. And I think that's how you start to build coalitions throughout the state. On top of that, you also have the moment in time where there is this statewide framework for cities and counties to follow. And regardless if cities and counties decide on whether or not their boards would include the subpoena power authority or not, again, I think we have a lot of the conversations that they would be having anyway, the questions that they might ask and the answers that might be given. Why not take this as an opportunity to try and lead amongst our state? So, you know, I like the way this goes. I think this also gives us clear work for committee members to go out there and talk to our cohort around the state. So I think this makes a lot of sense. But again, love to hear some input from other committee members on this. Co-Chair, do you have anything?
No, I concur. I mean, we've been tracking this one down, trying to see how we can make it work and fit it within the broader construct of the state and the more complex environment it exists in. I think staff's recommendation makes sense for now, and we just keep looking for that opportunity where it is something that is palatable and achievable, rather than try to force it when we don't necessarily see that exact moment. So, makes sense to me.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Eggleston, go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly to also concur. I mean, I think it is incumbent on us to put on our first draft of our legislative agenda anything that we think would be helpful to achieving the goals that we have for our community, the city that we represent. But I do think that we are wise to take into consideration the feedback we get both from legislators and from our advisors in this work, who we have on the call today, in terms of what we have opportunities to succeed on, so as not to undermine the places where we can win by trying to force the hand of legislators on something that there's not much opportunity to succeed on. So I think this needs to continue to be a priority for us, but I do think we'll be playing a stronger hand if we go to Raleigh with several other municipalities in tow who believe this could be valuable for them, instead of just trying to go it alone on this one in particular.
So, Mr. Fenton, are we looking for a motion to get this to accept or deny this recommendation and move it on to council discussion? Is that what we're right here?
Mr. Chairman, I think the answer to your question is a resounding yes. Or I know that the answer to your question is a resounding yes.
It's going to be taken up at the council.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we would have to move it out of committee. We would have to vote to move it out of committee for it to be taken up. Well, I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept staff's recommendation and move it on to full council.
Second.
Guess we'll do a roll call vote. Is Mr. Newton still on? He's not here, but he'll be.
Chair, can you repeat the specific motion that you're making?
I am making a motion to recommend recommend staff's recommendation to the full council. You still second?
I didn't second it in the first place, but I do vote for it.
I second the motion,
All
Co-Chair.
right, so Mr. Newton is a yes. Mr. Eggleston?
I was the yes. I'm not sure if we've heard from Mr. Newton.
He is no longer in the meeting, so he'll be recorded as a yes. Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. Our vote is unanimous. Do we have to do anything as it relates to the CRB? Was that in the motion as well?
I understood that to be part of what you had made the motion about in terms of adopting the recommendations of staff.
Yes. Okay. Just clarifying. All right, Mr. Fenton, I think we can move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for that discussion. Really do appreciate it. I know this has been a real tough issue for the council and the city. The next item on the agenda is sort of a traditional agenda item for the meeting after the city council has received the state and federal legislative agendas at the action review. And there's really, I have attached the presentation from given last week. And this is really, this is just your chance if there's anything you want to bring up about last week's action review for any comments or whatever. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, we did not have it. We're not planning to go through this presentation.
Second. I second him not repeating the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No. I think we've gone over the schedule, and people are aware that we're on a pathway. I think we can move on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. And finally, Mr. Chairman, the last couple items are our traditional closeout things for the committee meetings. Any committee discussion, opportunities coming up in the future, and so forth. And I'll just hand it right off to you, sir.
Hand it off to me. Does anybody have any further discussion that they want to bring up here to the table?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't.
Nope.
Mr. Chairman, one thing I want to note, we are meeting next month, Monday, December 21st, but also at the same time, I want to make sure you all are aware, we're going to be sending out the invitations, calendar invitations for the 2021 meetings in the first half of the year. So when you get these, please don't reject them or delete them. Please accept them. And of course, as we get closer to those dates, we'll find out more about what's going to be talked about in those meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unless the committee has anything further, anything for the good of the order, or anything that somehow got missed on the agenda? With that, can I entertain a motion to close?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
See y'all in a few.
Okay.
Thank you, committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.